Hello again, everyone. Welcome back. I am working on Mountain Meadow. I got this kit from the Stitch and Snip in Garden Valley, Idaho. I showed you in the first video our cutting instructions, how I changed that up a little bit. I did realize one thing, so if you're watching this before you've actually sewn anything together, because you want to see how it goes, on the fabrics that it shows to cut diagonally one time. You actually don't need to do that. You can, instead of, I'm just going to show you real quick here, instead of taking and cutting those fabrics diagonally like this and then taking those halves and putting them together, because all of our half square triangles are the same. It's not like I'm putting a bunch of different fabrics together to make different half square triangles. So instead of cutting them in half and then folding them together and sewing them, which then you have the bias, which is can be problematic if you're pulling, what you can do is you can put them together like this, draw your center line and then a 1/4 inch from each of that center line on each side, and sew down those lines that are a 1/4 inch from the center line. And then you basically just cut it, iron them open, and it does exactly the same thing that we just did, but you're not cutting beforehand and having that bias that could potentially be a problem. Doesn't really matter either way, but that is a different option for you. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is trimming up. So from the previous video, I talked about how I didn't follow the exact cutting instructions. I upsized just a touch, okay? 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch is what I upsized. So when I put those together, I want, like for this one, I want a 3-inch square, okay? Well, if I put this over, I'm over by about 1/4 of an inch, which I upsized about 1/4 of an inch. So that's what it should be, okay? Same with my half square triangles. So what I'm going to show you is how to actually trim those up. I'm done with my numbering system here. At least for now, I'm going to relabel these once I get the blocks together, so that as I go through, I know which blocks are which, because in 6 months, I'm not going to remember, guarantee it. All right, so I do not have a 3-inch square ruler, so I'm going to use my 4.5-inch square. It's nice and small. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I have this diagonal line right here. This is going to get placed on this seam here. On the center, since I want a 3-inch square, I'm going to have my 1.5-inch marks on this center mark. So that way I get my block centered and everything is in the center and correct. So turn it around so that my 1.5 inch is correct. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is line up this diagonal line along this seam. Okay, let me zoom in so you guys can see that a bit better here. Okay, now I have my 1.5-inch mark this way and this way, vertical and horizontal, on that center dot, and this is lined up, so that's going to keep me nice and square. And if I look here, my 3-inch line is on that seam, and this one here is on that seam as well. Okay, so now I'm going to take, and I'm just going to take that little bit of excess off. Okay, now I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to do the same thing, and also making sure that my 3-inch line is along this outer edge, and then making sure that this diagonal line follows that seam. And I have a little bit of bulk in the middle, so it wants to wiggle on me just a little bit. So I want to make sure that I'm holding that nice and tight. Now for these, when I ironed these, and I did this with all of my quarter square triangles, it says to open up these seams. So that second seam that you would do, it's wanting you to open it up. I am not a big fan of open seams. It makes the stitches more likely to come out. I find that when I go to quilts that have open seams, there are a lot of holes in the seams. And so I'm not a big fan. So the other thing that you can do to alleviate that bulk, because that's really what they're trying to do, is alleviate that bulky center right here. Okay. The other thing that I can do to do that is I am just going to pop a couple stitches right here, and I am going to pinwheel my seams around. Okay. So all of my quarter square triangles are done that way. So you can see, I'll show you on this one as well. So again, I just pop a couple of stitches right there, and then I iron so that it goes in a circle. And I pop those stitches first so I know which way that they should go, right? Helps me out a little bit so I don't have to think so hard. Okay, so that's gonna help alleviate that bulk. You're not gonna have a big bulky center. Okay, now half square triangles. It's going to be the same thing, except I don't have to do it the second direction. And I don't have a center per se, so that part doesn't really matter. So I'm going to line up this diagonal 45-degree line on that seam. I'm going to make sure that I have a little bit to cut off and that I have a little bit excess on this side to cut off as well. Okay, so that I'm not cutting it short. I don't want it to be down here, and then I'm going to cut all this off, and then I've shortchanged my block. I don't want to do that. Okay, and I want to make sure that all sides are square. So I'm going to cut all sides, not just two sides, because I could do that as well, but I want to make sure that everything is nice and square. So I'm not going to do that. And then by squaring these up, it also gets rid of these little dog ears. So, you know, win-win for us. So again, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to make sure that that diagonal line is along my seam. I've got 3 inches, 3 inches. I've got a little bit of excess to cut off. So that's what I'm going to do. You can see it's not much. I'm not cutting off a lot. But that's what making those pieces a little bit bigger does for me. Okay, now I'm going to go to my slightly larger ones. These are my 4.5. So this ruler is 4.5 inches square. So here's the nice thing about this one. I have a rotating mat here. Okay, and this is where it comes in handy. The smaller ones doesn't really work, but this one it does. Okay, so again, I'm going to make sure that that diagonal line is along my seam. And then I'm making sure that I have a little bit of excess around all 4 sides of my square. And then I'm just going to rotate my mat. When I put my hand back on my ruler, I want to make sure that I'm not moving that ruler. If anything looks off, I'm going to readjust and make sure that my lines are still set where they need to go. Okay, last side, there we go. Now I have a nice square. Okay, and you can see, you probably can't really see much difference between these two. This one is a little bit large. It looks pretty good, but if I put it on my mat, you can tell it's just a little bit wonky, okay? Is it gonna make that big of a difference in my block? Probably probably not. I can probably fudge that a little bit, but my block's gonna go back together so much better by squaring it up, okay? So again, with this quarter square triangle, it's still 4.5 inches so that I can go all the way around. And then for this one, because it's 4.5, I'm gonna take half of 4.5, which is 2.25. So I'm gonna make sure that my 2.25 mark is right there on that center point. And I'm gonna make sure that that diagonal is going across. Now the other thing that I can do is I can make sure that my corner here and my corner here line up with my seams, and they do. So I'm in really good position here. Okay. Take my hand off, rotate it around. Make sure that I'm not skewing that ruler as I lift up or put my hand back down. And then we take it up. That little dog ear didn't come off. And just like that. And we have a nice square block. Now, the last one that we have is this big guy that's going in our spacer, okay? So, again, 4.5 inch ruler isn't gonna cut it. I don't have, this guy is supposed to be 8 inches square. I do not have an 8-inch ruler, square ruler. So I'm gonna use my 9.5. We're gonna do it the same way that we did the 3-inch squares with our 4.5 inch. So you can see when I put this on here, I'm gonna have this diagonal that goes along that diagonal seam. My 4-inch point is gonna be right here in the center. And when I look at that, I have a little bit of excess down here. Again, it's not much. We didn't add much to those. It doesn't take much. And then just because it's bigger, it's easier if I don't go across like that. Okay, and again, I spun that seam in the back. Okay, now I'm gonna make sure that this lines up. I'm gonna make sure that I have 8 inches here, 8 inches here. And just like that, I have a nice square, quarter square triangle. There are rulers out there that you can use for half square triangles, quarter square triangles, all of that. But you don't have to spend the money to do it. You can do it this way and it's fine. I'm doing another block of the month where I am going to be using a quarter square triangle ruler. It'll be in a few months, so you'll probably see that around April if you want to know how to do that. But this is a good way to do these quarter square triangles. It works with the amount of material that we have for this particular quilt. So hopefully this helps you. I'm gonna now put this together just with, I've got my blocks all ready to go. I can follow the instructions on putting those blocks together. I'm just following their instructions here on how those go together for both sets, the big one and the small one. And then this will be the spacer that we are putting together. Yeah, it told me to only make one quarter square triangle. Hopefully they will use another one because we cut enough for 2. So we'll see how that goes. But I've got a second one in case I need it, and we'll go from there. But I'm just gonna put these blocks together and I will see you next month. Happy quilting.